And our next panel is emerging technologies. In this session, we have scientists and innovators from universities and high-tech companies, and they will present the latest achievements in high technologies, artificial intelligence, energy transport, and military technologies. Our first contributor is Jürgen Altmann. He's a physicist and peace researcher at Dortmund University. He's a co-founder and the chair of the German Research Association for Science, Disarmament, and International Security. He teaches about the relationship of natural science, armament and disarmament, and has authored chapters in corresponding textbooks. And his presentation will be new military technologies, dangers for international security, and preventive arms control. Mr. Altmann, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes,
For sure. Very good. Okay. Just 2 years ago, I have written an overview article on exactly the questions in the title that you just mentioned. And I have started with a general remark and then went through a couple of technologies, about 10, and then came to a few conclusions. And I'm not sure how many minutes you have allotted to me, but maybe in the next 7 or 8, I'll go through this shortly. Whoever wants to read the article, it's available on the internet. So first thing is, we have to understand that there is a qualitative arms race. There's an arms race, in particular, among the major powers, which are the US, Russia, and China. China rising in a sense, but there are quite a few others, such as France or United Kingdom and others, who kind of follow the role model set by the United States. And this arms race is to quite some extent driven by the efforts of the United States to remain militarily, technologically superior. They have the explicit goal of having so good superiority in military technologies that they are able to gain victory against any enemy on enemy war battlefield. I think that's unrealistic, but nevertheless, that is what drives the US. And we have to understand that the US carries 2/3 of the worldwide expenditure on military research and developments. All others are about 10% of that or lower. It's about $70 billion per year just for military R&D. The military budget of the US is 40%, and if you wish, a little more or less share of the worldwide military expenditure. So coming to the various new technologies that are on the horizon or are already being deployed in the military field, there are a couple which you could call kind of traditional. So this is, on the one hand, a ballistic missile defense, reinvigorated by the US about 20 years ago by abrogating the anti-ballistic missile treaty. There's the, well, also kind of traditional issue of space weapons. There have been a few anti-satellite weapon tests, but nevertheless, real space weapons have not yet been permanently deployed. And even though quite a few countries have begun to found space forces, military units carrying for space, they are mostly limited to observation and well, launching their own observation satellites, etc. Observation situation in space. A newer development is the field of hypersonic weapons, in particular hypersonic glide weapons that would be launched into out of the atmosphere by a ballistic missile, a big one, as usual, if you wish, but where then, after a short course on an ellipse through space, the re-entry vehicle does not enter by a steep angle into its target, but goes kind of gliding on the outer atmosphere from 100 kilometers descending to 30 kilometers altitude, and then descending on the target, exploding there, either with a nuclear or a conventional explosion. Problem here is that, or the military advantage is being in rest of the atmosphere, they can take curves by just moving little control flags, going up or down or going left or right, which makes defending against them much more difficult. And also they can take turns, and they will, because of their relatively low flying altitude, they will be detected by ground-based radar systems much later. And there is a couple of new fields. Let me just mention the idea of autonomous weapon systems. We have kind of become accustomed to drones, armed, uninhabited air vehicles. They have been controlled by, up to now, by radio remote control, by from ground control stations where soldiers, normally soldiers, sometimes it's also intelligence officers, soldiers sit and control and observe the situation, and after quite some time and quite some thinking and pondering, they release their missiles against the ground target that they have seen on their video screens. Nevertheless, this is also a development about 20 years old. However, the next step would be to turn these systems to autonomous shooting. So all the tasks of finding out potential targets, thinking, are they legitimate, are they civilian, or are they military targets, and then releasing the weapon would be done by the computer on board. And this is not yet here, and since a couple of years, all the member states of the so-called Convention on Conventional Forces, CCW, I'm sorry, Convention on, I'm sorry, let me start again, of the Convention on certain conventional weapons, and then that are deemed to cause superfluous suffering or are not discriminative. They discuss whether one should have a prohibition of autonomous weapon systems. This is all in flux, and up to now there has been no unity in this convention. Next new development is cyber war. Many states have established cyber forces who not only prepare protecting their own military information technology systems, but also preparing attacks and intrusion into others' computer systems, not only into the military ones, but also into civilian ones. And in many cases, of course, the information technology infrastructure in countries serves both purposes. It's just being co-used by civilian as well as military users. Quite a while ago, 15 years ago, I have written an overview book on potential military uses of nanotechnology. There's a long list which I won't go through here, but there are certain dangers connected to some such uses, and I have proposed some solutions for those. More general than in autonomous weapon systems, the topic of artificial intelligence in military uses has come up as important, and as I said, in the efforts of the US to stay at the technological forefront in military technologies, the US is putting much effort in using artificial intelligence algorithms in all kinds of military applications, autonomous weapon systems being just one of those, but then we have potential applications in simple, or not so simple, but in not shooting applications such as logistics, but also it could enter command and control systems and preparing situations not only of individual weapons systems, but also of whole fleets and units and so on. The next issue that I discussed is 3D printing or additional manufacturing, which could be used to faster prepare spare parts in the field and by the military. Of course, a very attractive thing and being widely used already in civilian industry. The next is synthetic biology and genetic editing. which could be used for military purposes as well. Of course, there is a biological weapons convention where nearly all countries are members, so the military hostile uses of such are prohibited. Unfortunately, there's not yet a verification mechanism in force. And finally, let me mention the concept of human body or brain enhancement, where human soldiers would gain some implants into the body or into the brain and so on. This is decades off, but nevertheless, it has been discussed already since 20 years at least. They're connected with many of these potential military new technologies or their uses are problems. One is several such developments or applications would be more widely available. So not just to states with their sophisticated research and development institutions, but also to non-governmental or non-state actors, in particular terrorist groups, because of many of these systems would also be small and could be accessed much easier. If we think of cyber weapons, it's just software. You could have this on every personal computer. The biggest problem that I foresee with many of these developments is a shortening of the time available to decide, the time to detect a potential attack and prepare counter attacks, and the time to make such decisions. So here the question of destabilization arises, where in a crisis, a computer algorithm might erroneously think, if you well, let me just say, conclude where the algorithm concludes we are under attack and shoots back, but this may be erroneous. So even if the potential enemies do not yet want a war, this automatic or autonomous decision making could lead into a war. So there's a big escalation risk, in particular because there is an increasing entanglement between conventional and nuclear weapons and decision systems. So what could be done to prevent such destabilization and prevent a new waves of an arms race? This would be preventive arms control, that is limitation or prohibition of new weapons or new weapons technologies before they are being deployed. This needs a longer discussion, and for any such area, one would have to have specific research ideas to develop concepts how they in particular could be limited or prohibited, and I have written to support some of these areas. In general, I think the political situation not as bad as 1.5 years ago, but nevertheless there's increasing threats in particular among the three main powers, but also in other regions and areas. So what humankind needs, and in particular what these states that participate in this qualitative arms race need, is to refocus their attention on a principle insight coming from the Cold War already, namely that national security enduringly, sustainably can only be organized in the context of international security. So I am calling for new steps and new enthusiasm for arms control, in particular preventive arms control, and these should be focused on the goal of increasing stability, military stability and crisis stability, not deteriorating it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Altmann, for sharing your, if I may say, a little bit scary information, but also for giving some proposals how to deal with them. Our next contributor is Frano Barbir. He is the professor and chair of thermodynamics at Faculty of Electrical Engineering, Mechanical Engineering and Naval Architecture at University of Split. He has been actively involved in fuel cell technology, working in USA as a researcher and manager in both industry and universities. The title of his talk will be Hydrogen Technologies and their role in decarbonization of energy supply. The floor is yours, Mr. Boko. Mr. Barbir, sorry.
Thank you very much. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. Yes.
Now the video cast.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me for this conference. It is my honor and a privilege to talk to you today about hydrogen technologies and their role in decarbonization of energy supply. Energy supply is one of the most important today, and so it's not just a role in decarbonization, but also in securing alternative ways of getting energy. Today, we get our energy basically from fossil fuels in a system that schematically looks like this on this slide, where majority comes from coal, natural gas, and oil. And the width of this line actually represents the quantity of coal, natural gas, and oil that we use. And we use them for different purposes. We use them in the power plants to produce electricity, and then we use this energy in buildings, in industry, and transport. And there is some minor use as a feedstock or non-energy use. But basically, what we need is here on the right side is that we need heat, we need electricity, and we need a movement, a transport. And you can see that this system is not only very inefficient because we have a huge amount of losses in energy conversion, but the system also generates a lot of carbon dioxide, a gas that accumulates in the atmosphere and creates global warming and global climate change. And all this fuss now about a meeting in Glasgow that just ended yesterday is about how to reduce this amount of CO2 that goes into the atmosphere. Actually, not only to reduce it, but completely decarbonize our energy system so that we can have an energy system that is not relying on fossil fuels anymore. And energy has been a culprit for almost 3/4 of the carbon dioxide that accumulates in the atmosphere. And this energy in industry, energy in transport, and energy used in buildings, and other fugitive emissions from energy production, energy in agriculture and fishing, and so on. So in order to eliminate CO2, we must have an energy system that is not producing carbon dioxide. And it's relatively, this is what the Green New Deal for Europe, and this is what this Paris Agreement, and this is what this meeting in Glasgow was about, is how to achieve a climate neutrality by as soon as possible, but probably by 2050. But also, we have set some intermediate goals to reduce carbon dioxide by 55% till 2030. And this requires a massive deployment of renewable energy sources such as solar and wind. We must close our coal power plants, and 20 of 27 Euro states already declared that they will close them by 2030. We need to electrify the transport. We need to decarbonize the heating and decarbonize industry, and practically stop investing in fossil fuels infrastructure after 2021. There is no point in investing in this infrastructure if you're going to leave it and have a new infrastructure. And this new energy system will look something like this. And it's a very, it's not very complicated to actually come up with this system. We know what we need, and we know what is available. That is solar, wind, hydro, biomass. And all we need is the technologies in between to provide us with the heat, electricity, and transport that we need. And this system is 100% based on renewable energy. And it's, as I wanted to say, it's easy to envision it, but it's not that easy how to transfer from the existing system to this one. That's a completely different story. Anyway, in this system, I can see a role for hydrogen, because hydrogen is a fuel that can be produced from any type of energy, but especially from renewable energy. And then I see the role of hydrogen in energy storage, in industry, in as a fuel for transport, and also as a feedstock. And so with the help of hydrogen, we can actually decarbonize the entire energy system. But primarily, we can produce electricity. From electricity, we can produce hydrogen, and then we can use it in the different applications. And to do this, So this would be the role of hydrogen in such energy system. First, enable large-scale, efficient, renewable energy integration, distribute energy across sectors and regions, act as a buffer to increase system resilience, decarbonize transport, decarbonize industry energy use, and also serve as a feedstock using captured carbon, and help decarbonize building heating. And the idea of using hydrogen is actually very old. Jules Verne was the first one who wrote about it in the 19th century. And then this idea revived in the 70s during the first energy crisis. And ever since, the scientists, including myself, have been working on different hydrogen technologies. So hydrogen technologies include production of hydrogen, primarily by electrolysis, of water electrolysis, using electricity from renewable power sources, hydrogen storage, hydrogen dispersion, hydrogen transport, hydrogen use in the vehicles, hydrogen use in industry, and hydrogen use for cogeneration in buildings. And in the rest of my presentation, I will go very quickly, just showing you what has been accomplished so far. First of all, technology for hydrogen production. I mentioned water electrolysis. It's a relatively simple process we learn even in elementary or high school. We can split water by applying a direct current and split it to its constituents, hydrogen and oxygen. And to use this, we must use energy from renewable energy sources. And that's the schematic view. Like we need energy and water, and we produce hydrogen and oxygen. And of course, the real system doesn't look anything like the experiment we did in elementary school. These are industrial electrolyzers, large scale, that are being used. It's a process that has been used for almost 100 years now. There are also, of course, modern developments as well. Hydrogen production from renewable sources. There is dozens of projects all around the world that is producing hydrogen on a large scale from renewable energy. This one, I believe, is in Japan, near Fukushima power plant. This one here is in Germany at the refinery where they use hydrogen instead of fossil-produced hydrogen. Technologies for hydrogen storage. We can store hydrogen as a compressed gas, as a liquid hydrogen. We can store it in metal hydrides. There are some exotic technologies that are being developed for storing hydrogen in small quantities. But for a large scale, we can use underground depleted gas wells, salt caverns, and aquifers. Hydrogen can be transported through pipelines, or it can be transported by trucks, in tube trailers, or in cylinders, or as a liquid. We have technologies for hydrogen use. We can combust hydrogen in internal combustion engines, just like we burn fossil fuels today. We can use it in the jet and rocket engines. And actually, the entire space program has been based on hydrogen as a fuel. We can also produce steam by just combusting hydrogen, very easily produce steam. Catalytic combustion, also, we can use hydrogen for cooking. We can use hydrogen in some metal hydrides applications. But the emphasis of these technologies is actually electrochemical conversion of hydrogen in fuel cells. And what is a fuel cell? Fuel cell is just opposite of an electrolyzer. It's an electrochemical energy converter that converts chemical energy or fuel, which is hydrogen, to electricity. And byproduct is water and also heat, because this reaction, which is a reverse of electrolysis, is about 50% efficient. So 50% of energy of hydrogen goes to electricity, 50% goes to heat. And the fuel cells have been used also in the space program for decades now. So it's well-proven technology that is about to be used now on a massive scale. We already have hydrogen vehicles, more than 20,000 sold so far in the world. Companies like Toyota, Hyundai, Honda, Mercedes, they're all in this, and some of them are already commercially available. You can buy it. I would have bought it if I had a hydrogen refueling station nearby. There are also hydrogen fuel cell taxi fleets in Paris, in The Hague, in Netherlands. But hydrogen used in the automobiles actually is not the best way, because probably battery electric vehicles, as shown here, can cover this. On this scale, this is how automotive companies see development of transportation in the future. So on this side, we have a heavy duty cycle, we have a light duty cycle, we have a high load or heavy vehicles, we have a low load or personal automobiles. So in this region here, electric vehicles with batteries are sufficient, but as we go to higher loads and more complex driving cycle, we need more energy, and storing energy in hydrogen is more effective than storing energy in batteries, not by efficiency, but by weight. Hydrogen stored is about 2.5, 3 times lighter than the batteries, and also refueling time plays an important role. That's why we see hydrogen as a fuel for heavy transport, such as buses. This is an example in the city of Aberdeen in Scotland, but there are hydrogen buses all over Europe, in the cities in Switzerland, in Italy, Norway, Germany, UK. This was a program, Clean Hydrogen for Inner Cities, which has been continued by program JIVE. Now we have JIVE 2, and this demonstration of hydrogen buses will continue in Europe. Hopefully, we will have also 20 buses in Zagreb in a couple of years. Hydrogen for trucks, there are companies that are developing hydrogen trucks and already have orders for those trucks, where hydrogen system is actually shown here. And this is Nikola, this is Hyundai that already has an order of 1,600 trucks for Switzerland, or Hyzon that has an order of 1,500 trucks for New Zealand. And for these vehicles, there are already hydrogen refueling stations developed, and they look exactly or very similar to the ones that we are used to use now with the gasoline and diesel. And there are about 440 or maybe 500 now gas stations, hydrogen gas stations in the world, and about 200 in Europe, mainly in Germany. The closest one to Zagreb is in Graz. We actually do have a refueling station in Zagreb, but it's only for a bicycle. Hydrogen trains, there are already 14 trains being used in Germany, developed by Alstom. Siemens is also working on a hydrogen train. Hydrogen ferries and ships in Norway, in Scotland. This is one that has been launched just this summer in San Francisco. And also hydrogen airplanes. In 1988, Tupolev made the first flight with one engine converted to run on hydrogen. And then in the 90s, there was a study by Boeing on developing a hydrogen hydrogen airplane. And then Merkel announced a hydrogen strategy for aviation just 2 years ago. And immediately after that, Airbus came with a vision of a different hydrogen-powered airplanes that they will be working on. So also we can use hydrogen in industry, for example, in the steel production, where we can replace a coal or coke that has been used in the process and that created a lot of carbon dioxide. We can replace it with hydrogen produced electrolytically from a renewable energy. And this has already been demonstrated in several steel plants in Germany and Sweden. Also, we can use hydrogen from renewable energy, from solar, wind, and hydro, to replace hydrogen that is currently being produced from natural gas and is used in the petrochemical industry to produce ammonia, and ammonia is used for fertilizer production. And we can replace this hydrogen with a clean, or we call it green hydrogen. And also, we can use hydrogen for cogeneration in buildings. There are fuel cells that run on hydrogen that can be installed in buildings and produce both electricity and heat. So, in the conclusion, hydrogen is the cleanest fuel. It produces nothing but water when it's being used, either combusted or used electrochemically in the fuel cells. But hydrogen must be produced from renewable energy, again from water, so there is no carbon involved at all. Because of that, hydrogen can contribute to decarbonization in transportation, as I showed cars, buses, trucks, trains, ships, airplanes, in industry, both as a feedstock and fuel, and in buildings for cogeneration, and hydrogen technologies for production, hydrogen storage, transport, delivery, utilization, they already exist, and they just need to be deployed on a large scale. And the political will in Europe now is actually going in favor of hydrogen. Just last year, Europe came with a European hydrogen strategy that has set some very aggressive goals for hydrogen in even 2024, in 2030, and 2050, because Europe wants to have a lead in these technologies in the world. And also seeing that hydrogen can contribute to decarbonization of energy supply by 2050. Thank you for your attention.
Professor Barbir, for sharing your thoughts and information on hydrogen energy. Our next speaker is Boko. He's the president of EUBusiness, a think tank that encourages the development of European Union, global understanding of what the European Union is, and also encourages the European Union to understand global processes. The title of his presentation is, Does the technological development accelerate or decelerate? Mr. Boko, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I hope that technology works fine. And since we have just heard a lot concerning the emerged technologies, I would like to bring us a bit back to realize how technologies really emerge, because I think it's very important to understand the time frame in which technologies in which we became actually aware of the technologies and their outcome, not only technologically, but to our society. So I want to bring us back and probably remind you on a movie called Dangerous Liaisons, which you might probably seen in cinemas, but even more on the book, which is a great book and actually among the best ever written novels, together with Don Quixote and Robinson Crusoe in many of these best ever books. Anyhow, there is a sentence in this very unusual novel, because the whole novel is only exchange of letters. There is nothing but exchange letters. And in one of the sentences is written that, that the huge technological advancements before the French Revolution allowed for the very significant extension of the life expectancy. Before the French Revolutions, in years like 1750, the life expectancy was 24.8 years. And just before the French Revolution, it has grown above 30 years. It was like 30.5. And we might consider what have been these huge technological advancements that allowed for that. And it's really not so easy to recall of these significant achievements. There is no industrial revolution. They use cattle for agriculture, horses for transport. They were dying of every possible infection. So to us, it might seem quite like Egypt in times of pharaohs and Moses. But then the 19th century arrived. The Industrial Revolution came. The beginning probably with the steam engine, and then the railways in 1830. And not neglectable 1831, when Faraday discovered electromagnetic induction, which is a very, very important breakthrough from a technological point of view. But what I wanted to say is that only a technological investments per se couldn't make a huge social impact. So the 19th century is also the period of a very significant social improvement of social relations, rule of law, abolishment of slavery, more democracy. Let's not forget that 1884 is when Bismarck initiated universal health care. And this is also by the very end of the 19th century when we had electrical power really in use. I should never forget mentioning that the first city ever enlightened was the Croatian Šibenik. 2 days after the Niagara power plant was operational, but Niagara power plant didn't have a connection lines to the nearby city of Buffalo. So Šibenik was before enlightened, almost a year before enlightened than Buffalo. And with these, I would say, very significant changes, we entered into the 20th century, more or less our century. And I somehow divided this period into two sections. One would be the first half century, or more specifically 60 years, until 60. So from my point of view, the end of 50s and the beginning of 60s was actually the end of large armed conflicts. If we recall, of course, the world wars, and then the Korea, the Vietnam. At that time, particularly when we are reflecting to Pugwash conference, we have to have in mind that after the beginning of 70s, we are enjoying the peace that we have never been enjoyed before ever in human history. But mentioning this period until the 60s, I would like to pick a few of these discoveries, which I think that they are quite significant. By all means, I would mention 52, and when Rosalind Franklin photographed the first DNA. And then, of course, Watson and Crick published the paper, and they got the Nobel Prize, not the Rosalind. This is, from a social point of view, I would say, extremely important situation, which would never be possible. That is, then only a few years happened the first oral contraceptive in 60, which structurally changed the global circumstances, making women much, much more present in our society from every possible perspective. And of course, then these breakthrough technologies or achievements, like in 69 landing on the moon, which is the breakthrough of our civilization by all means. And just few days later, after this landing of the moon, was the first internet message from USLA by ARPANET. And not forgetting, in 72, the Pioneer left our part of universe and entered the outer space. When I mentioned Šibenik, it is not only because I am a patriot, I am from Croatia, but it's also somehow signifying that the small nations and so-called minor individuals, probably like Tesla or alike, could really initiate some cutting-edge technologies which would change our societies and the way we live. Since I realized that there are a lot of people attending the conference from Croatia, let us not miss that in 69, the fourth ever installed IBM 360 mainframe computer, by far the biggest boost of computer sciences ever, was installed in Zagreb. And only a few years later, UNIVAC was at the Srce computer, again, the university computing center in Zagreb. And that particular year, The contract concerning the nuclear power plant in Krško was also established, and the contract with Westinghouse, so the Western technology, very cutting edge technology, was signed in 71. And then we are entering, after the Children of Flower, after these social turbulences, we are entering in the second part, I would say, in the very part of the history in which we take place. And what are the major achievements? What is so significant for our life today, in addition of these technologies that we have just mentioned? Well, we are obviously living in the times of Facebook, in the times of iPhone and Instagram, in the times of social networks. And sometimes we might think that this is somehow incomparable or less important, less relevant than the outer space or the first electricity. But from my opinion, we have to very carefully consider that the technological advancement should be in accord with the development of our societies. And I think that put these two things into a balance is very, very important to achieve sustainability in our lives, in our developments, in our growth, in our communication. That is actually the main point of what I wanted to share with you. But then, since we have mentioned some of really breakthrough technologies like artificial intelligence, it is obviously incredibly important. How shall we adapt to such changes in respect to political systems, in respect to the meaning of states, in respect to migration and immigration, in respect to many, many things which make our world universal. Going back to hydrogen that we have just mentioned, and of course, the electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, let's never forget that the first ever operational vehicle was an electrical vehicle, already in 1884. When we speak about high power cars, or the cars which we would emotionally like to have, I think that many people would go for a Porsche. Let's not forget that the first Porsche was electric Porsche, already in 1898. And the real boost of gasoline engines started only with the introduction of electricity, when there was not any other way to sell so much of petroleum like before. A brilliant idea by the Rockefeller family, which introduced so many combustion engines and the spending of fossil fuels. And the real production of the classic cars was actually initiated with, we all know, the 4T model. But the wife of Mr. Ford, even at that time and after that time, drove the electric cars. So we are living in the world, I think, in which we have to be very careful with our technologies. We have to put into balance when is the development of certain technologies and when they come into practical application. I had the privilege to working with Mr. Kuriak at the beginning of our career. And the foundation of ultrasound is certainly the piezoelectricity. The piezoelectricity is what the Curie brothers are known, and it was established in 1880. And the medical usage of ultrasound emerged only with Jan Donald in Glasgow in the 80s, in the end of the 50s. But the real boost was actually in 70s and 80s. Let's not forget that the first batteries, electric batteries, were invented in 1859. And they used to boost to support these electric vehicles in the 19th century. But let's also not forget that the first lithium-ion battery was invented in 1970. By the way, invented for the Exxon company, for the fossil fuel company. And the Nobel Prize was awarded only 2 years ago, in 2019. So sometimes we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful and very patient and keep on struggling and waiting for the time when technologies will really emerge. The same probably as with the DNA, because only now in COVID times, we understand how RNA, based on the foundations of DNA, could actually help in vaccination and reducing the sufferings out of this horrible plague that we are all enjoying in these times. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope that I didn't take too much of your time.
No, you haven't. Thank you very much, Mr. Boko, for your very interesting historical overview. And our next speaker is Bojan Pečnik. He is CEO and founder of Hipersfera, the first Croatian aeronautical startup. He got his PhD from Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics, and he was also a lecturer at University of Split, where he, with other colleagues, founded the graduate course in astrophysics. The title of his presentation is Persistent Aerial Presence as a Service. So the floor is yours, Mr. Pečnik.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I will be presenting to you today our work on the next generation infrastructure for broadband data services for societal challenges of today and tomorrow. But before I do that, I'd like to thank Ms. Anna Jerković for the invitation to participate in the conference and connect in Pugwash, reconnect with Pugwash in that way. So our global society faces many serious challenges. Climate change makes extreme weather events more frequent and impacts ever more people. And sometimes nature bestows us with more than one calamity at once, such as an earthquake in my hometown a year and a half ago, in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown. People were scared and confused and did not know if they should stay inside or go into the streets. It took almost half a day for the right instructions to be passed on. Damage assessment follow-up lasted for months and actually years, as there is no quick way to inspect the state of the city-wide infrastructure from the ground. So how to make our society more robust and resilient? How to effectively manage complex and difficult situations in real time? Also, one of the challenges many countries are facing today is increased pressure on their borders, coupled with the inability to provide cost-effective solution to deploy persistent border surveillance over the entire hotspot regions. Another example is the challenge of bringing the sustainable modern connectivity to almost half of the global population living in rural and remote areas, both in developing and developed countries. India alone has almost 1 billion people with no option for commercially viable 4G connectivity. I mean, this is a very important point. Technologies for connecting people, such technologies that exist for decades now. We have 5G now, which is in mainstream operation. But over half of the global population does not even have the 4G connectivity, no connection to the world, because there is no sustainable, viable, commercially viable technology to do so. So what to do about these challenges? Hipersfera company has the answer to these challenges. We have developed the technology which can establish a permanent foothold in the atmosphere in a commercially viable way. Now we are working on partnerships to scale up these solutions globally. The solution to presented challenges is the airborne infrastructure for geographically distributed data services. Namely, Hipersfera airships are specifically designed to stay at one location above the ground or to slowly move about, irrespective of weather, for a long time and with a large enough payload to enable adequate mass market data services. Our unique selling proposition is called Persistent Aerial Positioning as a Service and is characterized by following 5 key features. The ability to quickly deploy anywhere in the world, to cover large ground areas with adequate quality of service, to do it periodically or continuously in a safe and appropriate way, even for time-critical applications, with cost effectiveness and viability for various population densities. Our competition is not in the air or in space, for none of the existing technologies there can combine persistence and coverage with cost effectiveness. This is clear from the SOCOT metric, specific operating cost on target, i.e. the price to keep a kilo of payload airborne for an hour in a persistent 24/7 365 campaign. All other known solutions which could potentially deliver such a service are 1 to 3 orders of magnitude more expensive than Hipersfera and are thus not viable for commercially sustainable persistent airborne applications. We don't see any on the market, none of them exist. So our real competition are existing terrestrial services where we are typically able to provide a better service for a better price and with a better profit margin. Therefore being sustainable and able to provide added value. So our business model is not to sell the airships as products. Instead, we are working with hardware and software specialists to build turnkey solutions for various applications, so-called PAPAS solutions. And we are working with service providers to bring these solutions to global markets. Using the mobile broadband service as an example, we are integrating commercial off-the-shelf and custom telecom equipment with our airship and are pairing with a national data link provider to offer SLA network service to existing regional telecom providers. In other regions, we might team up with a telco and offer a better and cheaper service to end users directly. For the market segmentation, we are focusing on a small number of market solutions where our services can quickly answer to strong market needs, which are currently not answered. A good example is telecom market, where we can offer 4G connectivity at 1/3 of CAPEX and OPEX of traditional industry to a large part of the population, which is currently not commercially viable market. On the other hand, damages from illegal lodging alone are estimated at $152 billion globally per year. And that is a rough order of magnitude for any of the initially targeted markets. Oh, I apologize. Okay. Insofar, about over 2 million euros have been invested from private investors and public grants into the Hipersfera project. Our technology readiness level is currently 5, with an ongoing European Horizon 2020 project ongoing, and we will be able, by the end of it, to reach technology readiness level 8 for border security application, with Frontex as an observer and 6 border police agencies in the consortium as potential customers. We also have strong partnerships to develop turnkey solutions in telecom, agriculture, and auto industry, and to grow organically by putting these services in the local and the regional markets. The first flights of the real-world prototypes will start next year, and this is a bit of exclusive information for Pugwash. So from next year, we will be able to demonstrate all the service elements of this technology in the real world. Our core team has Oxford, Princeton, and Max Planck education, has strong experience in startup and business development, finance, science, and technology. Hipersfera's proposals, Horizon 2020 proposals, have won multiple seals of excellence from the European Commission. With that, I would like to leave you with the end of the presentation, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to email it to me later on the email bill. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pečnik, for this very interesting presentation and for being with us today and to share that Croatia has something to offer in the sense of new technologies. Since the time is up, I would like to thank all of our participants for being a part of the Security, Science and Peace Conference. Professor Altmann, thank you very much for this, for your presentation regarding the emerging technologies. That was really something that we should all think about, and also the matter of ethics, which is very important when we see what the future will look like. I wanted to ask you about how would you see the future wars, but since we don't have time, maybe we will leave it for another discussion. Thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Altmann.
Welcome.
Yes, Professor Barbir, also thank you for your presentation regarding the hydrogen technologies, also very interesting, and hopefully Croatia will catch up all the new developments in Europe and in the world, because it's very important that we use this energy, these technologies, and that we implement it also here. I want to also congratulate for being elected in the committee of the Croatian Pugwash group, and we would really like you to join us in the next events. Mr. Haris Boko, yes. Mr. Haris Boko, also thank you for your interesting presentation. And also it is very important to see how it all started and how the technology emerged through the centuries, through the last century, and what are the Croatian also contributors, and what are the recent developments, and how we will will it look in the future. And thank you for being with us, and I hope you will stay till the end of the conference. And finally, Mr. Pečnik, we are really proud to see what a Croatian startup can do, how it can connect internationally, how it can be like localization, local and global, and we hope that it will be used in a wide market, and I wish you a lot of success with your Hypersfera. Thank you very much, and with this I would like to close our panel on emerging technologies. We will have a short break and we will return with the panel Croatia and Space.
Thank you.